It was supposed to be a special night. My 25th birthday in age where people start to feel like they're on the edge of something bigger. My friends had already sent their well wishes, the cake was ready, and the restaurant was the place where I had shared so many good memories with my parents. I had thought it would be a celebration of my journey, a moment of happiness and love from those closest to me. But when I sat at that dinner table, I had no idea that my life was about to shatter in ways I couldn't even imagine. The evening began like any other family dinner. My parents arrived on time, just like always. My mom greeted me with a smile, though it felt a little distant, like there was something she wasn't saying. Dad, too, was quieter than usual, his face impassive, as though locked in some private thought I couldn't break through. I didn't think much of it at first. It was my birthday after all, and I was too busy with the excitement of the evening to notice the tension that simmered beneath the surface. We sat down to eat, and the usual laughter, light-hearted jokes, and chatter filled the air. But something didn't feel right. The energy at the table felt strained, the smiles forced. My mother kept glancing at my father, and he, in turn, avoided looking at me directly. It wasn't the warm, familiar scene I was used to dot as we began. The main course, my mom, ever so casually, set down her fork and wiped her hands on her napkin. "We need to talk," she said, her voice strangely flat. My father stayed silent, still his eyes focused on the glass of wine in front of him, his hand resting on the rim as if he were searching for an answer in the swirling liquid. I felt a cold pang of dread coil in my stomach. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but my voice betrayed me. It trembled, and I hated that it did. My mother turned toward me, her gaze steady, almost rehearsed. Her eyes didn't sparkle with love like they usually did. Instead, they were cold, calculating. She stared at me for a moment too long, the silence hanging in the air before speaking again. "We need you to understand something. Something you should have known all along, but we never had the heart to tell you." My heart raced in my chest, and I felt the blood drain from my face. "What are you talking about?" Her words came like daggers. "We only kept you for the tax benefits." It was as if the entire world tilted on its axis, and for a few seconds, everything around me blurred. I couldn't breathe. My ears began to ring, and the restaurant sounds clinking. Glasses, soft murmurs from other diners faded into an overwhelming hum of disbelief. I felt as if I were hearing them from underwater, a muffled reality that didn't make sense. I thought she was joking, but her face, expressionless and matter-of-fact, told me otherwise. "What do you mean?" I whispered, almost pleading for it to be some cruel joke. Dad didn't look at me. He continued to sip his wine, his silence loud and suffocating. My mom sighed, her eyes never leaving mine. "It was a decision we made a long time ago. You were never meant to be a part of our lives in any real way. You were just ... a tax deduction." The words hit me harder than any physical blow ever could. Tax deduction? I couldn't process it. I wanted to scream, to shout, to demand answers. But all I could do was sit there, frozen. My mind raced. Flashes of my childhood birthdays, family vacations, quiet moments spent together came flooding back. But now they felt hollow. Every smile, every hug, every "I love you" seemed like a lie, a performance. I could feel my face flush with heat, my chest tightening with anger and shame. "No," I whispered, my voice breaking. "You don't mean that." My mother's face softened, but the hardness in her eyes remained. "You've always been useful. That's why we kept you. Don't you understand? You were never really ours. You were a tool, an asset." Her words were deliberate, like she had rehearsed them, like she had convinced herself of their truth. The room spun, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. The air grew thick, suffocating. I felt a rush of heat wash over me, a mix of disbelief and horror. How could they say this? How could they betray me like this, right in front of me? I had trusted them. They were supposed to be the ones I could count on, the ones who had always told me I was special, loved. But it was all a lie. I could feel tears threatening to spill. but I held them back. I wasn't going to let them see my weakness, not now, not after they'd reduced me to a number on a tax form. I stood up suddenly, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. The noise cut through the silence like a sharp blade. "I need to leave," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but it was final. I didn't care that it was my birthday. I couldn't stay there for another second. I couldn't stand to be in the same room with them. They had stolen something from me, something irreplaceable. I walked out of the restaurant, my footsteps echoing in the quiet night. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, betrayal, anger, hurt. I kept replaying the moment in my head, each word they had said, each moment I had believed them. I had never felt so alone in my life. My parents had been my world, my foundation, and now I realized it had all been built on lies. The night air was cold, but it did nothing to numb the rage building inside me. I wanted to scream, but there was no one to hear me. I wanted to tear everything apart, to confront them, to make them understand what they had done to me. But no amount of shouting would change anything. The damage had been done. The truth had been laid bare, and there was no going back. I wandered through the streets aimlessly, my feet carrying me with no direction, just the need to escape, to breathe. But there was no escape from what they had done. My mind kept returning to their words, to the way they had looked at me, like I was nothing more than a tool, a means to an end. The tears I had fought so hard to hold back finally spilled over, hot and relentless. Hours passed before I finally found myself back at my apartment, standing at the door, staring at the lock as if it would somehow offer me a way out of this nightmare. I could still hear my mother's voice, still feel the coldness in her words. A tax deduction. I could taste the bitterness in my mouth, the feeling of being discarded, of being nothing more than a financial calculation I sank onto. The couch, my body heavy, my mind in turmoil. The trust I had in them, everything I believed about family was gone. My parents were nothing more than strangers now. People who had used me, who had never seen me for who I was, who I had tried so hard to be for them. And yet, amidst the confusion and pain, a new feeling began to surface. It was subtle at first, a quiet stirring deep within me, a desire for justice, for retribution. I knew I couldn't let this go. They had hurt me, broken me in ways no one else ever could. I had been nothing to them, but I wasn't going to let them walk away unscathed. They would pay for what they had done. Not now, not yet, but I would make them feel the weight of their betrayal. I stood up suddenly, my mind made up. The first step would be to take control. It was time to make them feel what I had felt, betrayed, discarded, and broken. But how? How could I make them truly understand the pain they had caused? The answer began to form in my mind, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. It would take time, patience, and a plan. A clever plan. The kind of revenge that would hurt them where it counted and leave them with nothing. But for now, I had to focus on one thing, taking back what they had stolen from me. My dignity, my sense of self. And as I sat there alone in the silence of my apartment, I felt the weight of that decision settle on my shoulders. It was a heavy burden, but it was mine to bear. I would make them pay for what they had done. And I would do it on my terms. But even as I plotted my revenge, a part of me felt the grief for the family I had lost, for the love that had been twisted into something unrecognizable. It was a sorrow I couldn't shake, no matter how hard I tried. The days following that dinner were nothing short of a whirlwind. I could barely think straight. I moved through my routine, my work, and the mundane tasks of life, but it all felt like a dream, or rather, a nightmare I couldn't escape. My mind kept returning to their words, to the brutal truth they had laid bare, each echo piercing deeper and deeper. "We only kept you for the tax benefits." The words spun in my mind, a constant loop of disbelief and agony. It was strange, this feeling of being untethered. The world around me felt like a distant, blurry place, like I was watching it through a foggy window. Everything felt muted, as if I were living in the aftermath of an explosion where the sounds were too distant, too faint. My parents my foundation had crumbled before me, and with them, everything I had known and believed about myself. I kept asking myself, how could they do this? How could they betray me so completely? But the answer was always the same, cold and indifferent. They had never truly loved me. Not the way a parent should love their child. To them, I was an object, a tool to save them money, and now I was nothing. At night, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. Flashbacks of my childhood flickered through my mind like old, grainy photographs. Family vacations, my first day of school, birthday parties. I had always been so sure that these were moments of genuine love. But now, with the truth laid bare, those memories felt like cruel jokes. I began to question every hug, every smile, every word of encouragement. Had they ever meant it? Or had it all been a carefully crafted performance? I remembered the way my mother had held me when I was young, comforting me when I scraped my knee or was scared of the dark. How could that mother, the one who had reassured me, who had made me feel safe, have turned into the person who said those words, so callously, without a shred of remorse? And my father, always the stoic figure, always the protector, how could he too have been complicit in this? The betrayal stung in ways I couldn't even begin to describe. Days turned into weeks, and still the weight of their words pressed on me, suffocating me. I withdrew from my friends, unable to share what had happened, unable to explain the storm of emotions that raged inside me. I would hear their voices in my head, see their faces in every crowd, and each time it felt like I was being pulled deeper into an abyss. I was lost, consumed by the pain of their betrayal. But amid the sorrow, something else began to stir within me, something darker. Something that felt foreign at first, but began to grow with each passing day. Revenge. It was a thought I had. Pushed aside at first, too raw, too monstrous to entertain. But as the days wore on, as I became more consumed by the anger and injustice of it all, the idea of making them pay for what they had done began to take root. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, it began to feel like the only thing that could restore the balance. I found myself pacing late one night, my mind racing with ideas, with plans. I could see it now, their faces, the shock in their eyes when they realized what I was doing. It would be poetic, I thought. I would make them understand the pain they had caused me, but how? How could I make them feel the weight of what they had done, without making it obvious, without seeming petty or vindictive? I wanted something that would hit them where it would hurt the most, not just their pride, but their pocketbooks, their security. It was then that the first stirrings of a plan began to form in my mind. A smart revenge, I thought. One that would be calculated, precise. I would expose them, make the truth about what they had done public, in a way they would never see coming. I would strip them of the very thing they had used me for their precious tax benefits. But even as the plan began to take shape, I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling of guilt that accompanied it. Was this who I wanted to be? A person consumed by bitterness and hatred? I knew deep down that seeking revenge wouldn't heal the wound. It wouldn't bring back the trust that had been shattered. But it was the only thing that seemed to make sense now. It was the only thing that felt like it might bring me some sense of closure. I spent weeks researching, gathering information. The more I learned, the clearer the path became. My parents had meticulously used me as a tool for years, and now it was time to turn the tables. I knew that they had always prided themselves on their financial savvy, on their ability to navigate the system. But what if I could expose that? Same system against them? What if I could make their own success unravel in front of their eyes? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my parents' greatest vulnerability wasn't just the truth about their motives. It was their reputation. They had always maintained an image of success, of being well respected in their community. They were known for their charity work, their involvement in local politics. To tear down that facade, to expose them as the manipulative, self-serving individuals they were, would be the most devastating blow. It was a dangerous game, but one that I was willing to play. The plan started to take shape more clearly now. I would need help, someone with access to the right channels, someone who could help me navigate the legal landscape. A lawyer, a journalist, perhaps even a whistleblower from within their own circles. I wasn't sure yet, but I was willing to do whatever it took. I couldn't let them get away with it. They needed to understand the pain they had caused me, to realize that their actions had consequences. Yet, as I began to move forward, doubts crept in. What would this do to me in the end? Would it satisfy me to see them humiliated, their lives falling apart as mine had? Part of me feared that even if I succeeded in tearing them down, it wouldn't bring me the peace I sought. I would still be left with the emptiness, the absence of the love I had craved from them all these years. I spent hours wrestling with myself, torn between the need for revenge and the desire to heal. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't let them get away with it. I couldn't just pretend like nothing had happened. They had taken so much from me, my trust, my innocence, my sense of self, and I couldn't just move on. Not yet. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. The road ahead would be long, fraught with challenges. I would have to be careful, precise. I couldn't afford to make mistakes. Every step needed to be calculated, every move executed with precision. But I had already made up my mind. This was happening, and I would make them pay. In the quiet of my apartment, I sat at my desk, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The world outside seemed distant, irrelevant. All that mattered now was this my plan, my revenge. I knew the consequences of what I was about to do. I knew it would change everything. But as I looked out the window, the weight of my decisions settled on me like a heavy cloak. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the silence wash over me. There was no going back now. This was who I was becoming. And as the first steps of my plan began to take shape in my mind, I felt a cold sense of determination rise within me. I would make them understand. I would make them regret ever using me. But as I sat there, a part of me felt something else, something raw, something painful, grief for the family I had lost, for the trust that had been shattered. The pain of betrayal wasn't something that could be erased by revenge. No matter what I did, the scars would remain. And in the quiet of the night, with the plan beginning to take form, I wondered if I was losing something even more important than the love of my parents, if I was losing my own humanity. As the night deepened, I finally made my decision. Tomorrow, I would begin. The plan would unfold piece by piece, and I would take the first step toward reclaiming my life. But even as I set the course for my revenge, I couldn't ignore the weight that hung over me. It was the weight of sorrow, of regret, and the knowledge that no matter how much I hurt them, I would never get back the one thing I had lost, the trust of the people who had once been my everything. And so, as I prepared to set my plan into motion, I carried that heavy heart with me, unsure of where this path would lead, but determined to see it through. The weeks that followed my decision to seek revenge felt like I was standing on the edge of an abyss, teetering between the desire for justice and the gnawing emptiness that had settled deep within me. The foundation of my world had cracked wide, open, and now I was left with the shards of a life I could no longer recognize. My parents, the people I had trusted most, had exposed themselves as nothing more than cold, calculating individuals who had used me for something as trivial as tax benefits. Each morning I woke up, I had to fight to push away the crushing sense of betrayal. It felt like an invisible weight pressing on my chest, making it difficult to breathe. How could I have been so blind? All those years, all those moments of love, of shared memories, had it all been fake? Was I just an afterthought, a tool to manipulate? The questions spiraled in my mind like an endless loop, each one feeding into the next. But there was no turning back now. I had made my choice, and in the days that followed, the plan I had started to form began to solidify. I spent hours day and night piecing together the intricate web of information I needed to bring them down. I didn't just want to expose their betrayal. I wanted them to feel the weight of it, to be forced to face what they had done. I would make them pay, not just for what they had done to me, but for every other child they had manipulated, every innocent person they had taken advantage of. The world would know what they truly were. The first step was easy. I began gathering documents. I went through old tax returns, financial records, and any other paperwork I could find that might expose their scheme. Each page I turned seemed to reveal another layer of deception. I discovered things I hadn't expected, small financial transactions, hidden accounts, and proof of the careful calculations they had made to benefit from my existence. I was repulsed by the precision with which they had used me. It was all a game to them, and I was just a pawn. But it wasn't enough to simply gather the evidence. No, I had to find a way to make it public, to make them suffer the consequences of their actions. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how vulnerable they were, how much they relied on their reputation, their image. They had spent their lives building a facade of respectability, of being pillars of the community. They were known for their charity work, for their involvement in local politics, and for their image as the perfect parents. But behind that facade, they were nothing more than selfish individuals who had used me for their own gain. And I would make sure the world knew the truth. I hired a lawyer, a quiet, discreet man who was skilled in cases like mine. He wasn't interested in fame or recognition, he just wanted to win. He promised me he could help, and soon I had the legal support I needed to start putting the plan into motion. The lawyer worked with me to understand the best way to expose their actions, without drawing attention to myself. It was a delicate balance, and every move had to be calculated. I knew I needed more than just legal help. I needed a story, something that would draw attention, something that would make the world listen. So I turned to the media. I knew that exposing them for what they truly were wouldn't just hurt them, it would destroy everything they had built. I reached out to a journalist, someone with the credibility to get the story out there in a way that would ensure they couldn't escape the consequences. The journalist listened carefully, asking me probing questions, wanting to understand the full scope of the betrayal. I told him everything, the financial manipulations, the way they had used me, the cold, calculating truth of it all. And as the conversation ended, the journalist promised me that the story would get the attention it deserved. But even as the plan began to take shape, doubts crept in. I had expected to feel vindicated, to feel like I was finally in control, but instead I felt hollow. My heart was heavy with the weight of what I was about to do. I wasn't just exposing them, I was tearing apart the last remnants of the family I had once known. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the images of my parents, my mother, with her warm smile, telling me everything would be okay. My father, the strong, silent protector who had always been there for me. Now, those images were shattered, replaced by the truth. They had never truly cared. They had used me, manipulated me, and I was nothing more than a means to an end. The rage that had initially fueled me began to fade, replaced by a deep sorrow. What was I doing? Was this really what I wanted? To bring them down, to make them suffer just so I could feel some semblance of justice? Part of me wondered if this was just a way to keep myself from feeling the pain, to numb the hurt that had been left behind. If I exposed them, would it heal the gaping hole in my chest? Or would I just be left with more emptiness? As I sat at my desk late one night, going over the details of the plan, I found myself questioning everything. Was this who I wanted to become? Someone consumed by bitterness, by revenge? Could I really live with myself after all of this? I had always believed in justice, in righting the wrongs of the world. But what if this wasn't justice? What if it was just my own need for validation, for retribution? I closed the folder on my desk, running a hand through my hair as I tried to focus. The weight of the decision hung over me like a storm cloud. I knew what I had to do, but that didn't make it any easier. I had spent so many years loving them, trusting them. Now I was about to destroy everything we had built. But what choice did I have? They had taken everything from me. My trust, my innocence, my sense of self. And I was supposed to just move on, forgive them. How could I? How could I let them go unpunished for the pain they had caused me? The more I thought about it, the more the decision became clear. They needed to be exposed. The world needed to see who they really were. And if I had to be the one to do it, then so be it. The next day, I received a call from the journalist. The story was set to run. They had all the information they needed, and the plan was in motion. My parents' world was about to come crashing down. But even as I prepared for the fallout, a part of me still hesitated. Was this really the end I wanted? Or was there more to the story than just revenge? Could I find a way to heal the wounds, to rebuild my life without tearing them down completely? As I hung up the phone, I felt a pang of regret. I didn't know if I was doing the right thing. But one thing was certain: I couldn't go back now. The plan was in motion, and there was no turning back. I would have to live with the consequences no matter what they might be. The story went public the next day, and the impact was immediate. The media coverage was relentless. The headlines splashed across every news outlet. The world now knew what my parents had done. Their carefully constructed image years of reputation building, charity work, and community involvement collapsed. In an instant, their friends turned their backs on them, their supporters withdrew, and their lives, once so full of pride and accomplishment, fell apart. The truth was out, and my parents' world crumbled as I had hoped. But even as I watched their downfall unfold, I couldn't shake the sense of emptiness that had taken root in me. I had exacted my revenge, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like something had been lost, something that couldn't be restored. Sitting in the quiet of my apartment, watching the news reports, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what I had done. I had destroyed the only family I had ever known. And for what? A sense of justice? Or was it simply to satisfy the void that had been left in me by their betrayal? I had no answers, but I did know one thing. There would be no peace, no closure, no healing from this. Not for them and not for me. The storm inside me had passed, but the wreckage remained.